Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. Thank you for your patience these past several months as we plan and recorded episodes for Season 2. There's currently 9 episodes in queue, and we're excited to share them. Season 2 will have an emphasis, but not exclusively, on Midwest legal executives, and also a continued exploration of attorneys and executives at the crossroads of legal technology. Today, I have the pleasure of bringing back a legal consultant to the show as we discuss law firm mergers, travel tips, and relating to reporters. Just a reminder, the PDF transcript of this audio is available to download. Go to liongroup.recruiting.com/podcast. As many of you know, we interview corporate defense law firm leaders, partners, general counsel, and legal consultants. You're listening to episode 30 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of both men and women serving as leaders and executives in the legal industry. Enjoy a front row seat as Chris Batts speaks with general counsel, legal consultants, and law firm leaders and law partners at the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kent Zimmermann of Zeughauser Group. Kent advises on active merger discussions and firm-wide strategy. His current client roster includes 3 AmLaw 25 firms, and during his 2018 year, he advised on 3 large law firm deals. Before being a consultant, Ken was one of 3 equity partners who developed a small startup called Hubbard One, which was sold to now known as Thomson Reuters. Following the sale, Kent led the turnaround of West Legal Works, also a unit of Thomson Reuters. He graduated with honors from Washington University in St. Louis and earned his JD from Illinois Institute of Technology's Chicago-Kent College of Law. Welcome, Kent, back to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you on the show again.
Hey, Chris. Good to be back.
So, Kent, we had this same conversation more or less 3 years ago. You were episode number 2 for me. And again, I'm really excited to catch up with you these past 3 years. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Look forward to talking.
So much has happened in law firm world as far as mergers are concerned, and every news article out there that talks about mergers tends to talk about you. So I want to address your involvement. Now, whether you're involved on a deal, touching a deal, or integral to a deal, I know you have some insights in this world. And the most recent article, there's been several out there, but one that really sums up your activity that's probably known, that's not necessarily confidential anymore, are the 3 deals that you were part of in 2018. So Foley, Lardner, and Gerdier, Hunt and Williams and Kurth, Bryan Cave, Lighton, and Pazer. Can you give us a little bit of color to those deals and how those came together and why they came together?
Yeah, sure. So I think everybody who is involved in the industry knows that the industry is consolidating, and every industry goes through a period of consolidation or multiple periods of consolidation. It happens in aviation, it happens in food and beverage. You see beer companies merge and consolidate. You see auto, et cetera. And so it's the time for legal, and has been for a couple of years, for legal to consolidate. And today, the market is still highly fragmented, meaning even the largest law firm in the world has less than 4% of the market share that's addressable. And so there's miles to go for more consolidation, but we've seen a lot recently, including the 3 deals that you mentioned that I was involved in. And each firm has its own reasons for considering a combination. Most often, those that are thoughtful about it have a strategy that articulates what the firm aspires for its future and what it wants to be known for. And a combination is usually one of the options on the table to accelerate the achievement of their aspirations for the future. In other words, firms will size up. Does combining with another firm help us get to where we otherwise already wanted to go, whether or not we merge with another firm? And so that broadly is how most of our clients think about the possibility of combining with another firm. And of course, there's competitive drivers, competitive with respect to talent and clients, and there's macroeconomic developments and geographic cross-border capability considerations for some firms. There's industry areas of focus. So there's a lot that goes in to strategy and a decision about whether merging could help accelerate the achievement of it for a given firm.
So tell me about the trend. Obviously, it's consolidation, and there's consolidation on a U.S. border side, and then we've seen these over-the-seas tie-ups. You had mentioned to me that Light and Pazer over in the U.K. approached you about U.S. growth plans. Why was Bryan Cave a good fit for that, or from your perspective?
I advised BLP in the lead-up to their deal as they considered growth in the U.S. And BLP, like many firms, has a very thoughtful, well-articulated strategy. They're known for excellence in a number of areas. Many would put at the top of that list real estate and real estate finance. They historically have had one of the preeminent practices in that area, not only in the UK, but in many areas on which they've chosen to focus. They've also developed very deep capabilities in other industry sectors, other practice areas. And so they, like many UK firms, as they looked around the world for growth, were open-minded about the U.S. And for BLP, and really for any firm outside the U.S., when you think about being dominant globally in areas of focus, it's hard not to think about growing in the U.S. just because half the world's money spent on outside legal is spent in the U.S. Yeah. It's by far the world's largest market for legal services. This is where the money is. And so the road really runs through growing in the U.S. to be globally preeminent as a law firm. And that's part of what's driven so many deals, including that one. You know, you look at the decision that DLA made when it first came into existence. You look at Hogan Lovells. You look more recently at Womble, Bond Dickinson, Eversheds, Sutherland, and there's others. And there will be many more deals like that, both transatlantic and trans-Pacific. U.S. is a big draw because of the amount of money that's spent here. Also, the rates are very attractive here compared to many parts of the world. The sophistication of the matters, and I think the future is bright for the U.S. legal market. You know, we have a very strong plaintiffs bar here, and as many litigators who are listening will know, the U.S. has certain jurisdictions that are known as hellhole litigation jurisdictions. And they're known, you know, so East St. Louis would be an example, or East Texas historically was an example. East LA would be a third. And they're known as hellhole litigation jurisdictions largely because juries can award large sums of money there in cases. And so defendants, they think of them as hellholes. Well, the U.S., relative to the rest of the world, is essentially the world's hellhole litigation jurisdiction. Because in the U.S., we have jury trials, we have punitive damages, we have treble damages in some cases, we rarely have loser pay rules. And so that's why when a plaintiff can drag a deep-pocketed defendant into court, if there's any way they can do it in the U.S., they're going to choose that compared to many other places in the world. It's why the VW emissions case, for example, that didn't happen in Germany, happened in the U.S. because the plaintiffs knew that they could do better here in all likelihood than they could in Germany. So that's, you know, one of many examples. Our litigation landscape, it's one of many examples why the U.S. is a highly attractive market, and it's very green pastures compared to many other places in the world, and hard to be globally preeminent as a law firm without growing substantially here. And that's why there'll be many more of those deals here, transatlantic, trans-Pacific, and from other places in the future.
You are currently working on some matters that you probably can't talk a whole lot about, Kent, but where are you, and I don't even know if you can describe this either, where are you being drawn to for your matters right now? Are you seeing more domestic tie-ups occurring or more of the cross-border, as you alluded to, where the future's bright here in the U.S.?
Both. Yeah, we're working on a series of potential deals right now, the largest pipeline, I believe, that we've ever had in our history. And some of it is domestic, some of it is cross-border, some of it is transatlantic, some of it's trans-Pacific. Not all the deals that get started get across the finish line, but some of them do. And so we've never been busier on the deals. And, you know, some of those deals are ones where we're representing firms that are interested in combining with a larger firm, enjoying the scale and the increased profile and more depth in their areas of focus and more resources that a large firm brings to the table. And in other cases, we're working with larger firms that are interested in finding smaller firms to combine with to extend their strengths in given geographies or industry sectors or practices. In some cases, we're working on mergers of equals involving AmLaw 100, 200, Global 100 firms. I also and many of my partners work on strategy, pure strategy. And so that would be at the firm-wide level and at the practice group level, at the industry sector team level, sometimes at the office level. And in a nutshell, that strategy work involves building consensus among the partners about what their aspirations are for the firm's future or for a practice group or an office's future, and what it's going to take to achieve those aspirations, developing a plan to get there. And so I'm currently working with 3 AmLaw 25 firms on firm-wide strategy. And sometimes that strategy work leads to merger work because as the strategy is built out, there's a view that the possibility of a merger should be on the table to achieve the strategy. In other cases, that's not of interest, and the strategy work is separate from merger work. So varies from firm to firm.
In regards to these deals, Kent, from your perspective, knowing that many don't work out, what are you saying are some of the top reasons why these deals are dying and some of the top reasons why they're working?
It's a great question. We find that in successful deals, there's usually at least 2 common threads. The first common thread is that the 2 firms have shared strengths. In other words, they're both really good at some of the same things, whether it's being preeminent with respect to a given industry that the 2 firms serve, or really strong in a practice area that the both firms have chosen to focus on, or a geography that both firms focus on, or maybe a combination of those things. And so shared strengths is important. And parenthetically, I would say the knee-jerk reaction of some people we work with, some firms we work with at the beginning of our engagement, the knee-jerk reaction is the opposite of that sometimes. Sometimes they think that a successful deal would involve filling in each other's gaps exclusively. Our experience is shared strengths is step number 1. And great if you could also fill in each other's gaps in some respects, but shared strengths is important because when you're able to have shared strengths, you're able to create more high-quality depth in chosen areas of focus, which distinguishes the firm more, usually creates a longer deal list or longer list of trial wins, and it helps differentiate the firm from others who are trying to do the same thing, both with clients and talent. So, you're able to essentially create a dream team of high-quality people focusing on the same areas. So shared strengths, number 1. And then number 2 is shared aspirations for the future and interest in rowing in the same direction, trying to build something similar. So shared strengths, shared aspirations, we find are important to a successful deal. When those things don't exist, that can challenge whether or not a deal makes sense. And when they do exist, more likely that the firms could get there. To be successful, one of the most important things that we would look at early on is culture. And different people mean different things when they say culture. Generally, though, despite the fact that people will point to different elements of culture, we've observed over the years that in firms where there's a feeling that the way the money is split up among the partners, where there's a feeling that it's split up fairly, those firms tend to have stronger cultures. And in firms where the partners don't feel as if the money is split up so fairly, those firms tend to have weaker cultures. So that's something that we look at early on. And then we also look at to what extent our partners in the 2 firms that are contributing similarly are paid similarly. In other words, if there are partners in both firms that contribute similarly, whether it's billable hours or originations or other things that are important to the firm, if there's similar contributions on the key metrics across 2 firms, but the comp for those 2 people is different, that usually presents a question mark about whether the cultures are compatible. We also look at the shared, the extent to which the values of the partnerships are shared. We look at the extent to which there's incentive to collaborate and actual collaboration, the extent to which partners work together to pursue clients and to serve them across practices, across offices. All of that is telling about culture usually. So culture, usually very important. Usually the two firms need to have financial performance that is in the same ballpark, the same zip code, if you will. And if they don't have similar financial performance, usually that would mean that if there's a much lower performing firm of the two, that firm usually, not all of it would be desirable to the high performing firm.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that would usually be, something very early on to look at. Expectations on contribution of capital across the two firms would be something to look at.
Mm-hmm.
How they approach governance and management is important. Their comp systems and the extent to which they could be integrated is important, down to the things like the name of the firm. The combined firm is obviously going to be important, the leadership of the combined firm. So those are, as you would imagine, some of the things that are relevant, and some of those hurdles are easier to clear than others. But, the deals obviously are not very easy to put together and get across the finish line. And if they were, firms would do them routinely and wouldn't need help from somebody like us on best practices on how to get them done.
And I would assume, is it safe to assume, Kent, that you guys have an outrageous database of information on these firms I'm assuming you've surveyed, is that correct, with what you just listed? Because is that the only way or the accurate way of finding out, do these firm cultures and systems and governance match?
We do have a lot of data on the market and on firms we work with. We find there's no substitute for two firms getting to know each other, both in conversations with each other to explore whether there's value in combining, but also to explore elements of a deal like the ones we're talking about. And then also there's an exchange of data between the firms that we typically would facilitate, review, comment, and make recommendations on. Often we find it's helpful to get input from formal and informal leaders in one or both firms about their aspirations and what it's going to take to achieve them with respect to things like comp and governance and other topics that are important in deals. So the data is helpful from the industry and from specific firms. Benchmarking data that firms have compiled by banks they work with, like Citi and Wells, for example, are often helpful. But part of it is discussion about these topics and comparing data that's relevant and finding ways to bring the two firms together using best practices for how that's been done before in deals that we and others have worked on.
Next question, and it's a bit personal and fun, I would say, for you, in the sense of when people quote you're usually traveling. I almost wonder if it's fair to say that you live on an airplane, but have you totaled up how many miles you've traveled in your career, or at least in the past 12 months?
No. Maybe because I don't want to know.
Yeah.
I don't think I have, but it's a lot. And there are many weeks in which I'm traveling to 3, 4, 5 cities in a week. And so the travel is intense, but it goes with the territory. And, when we're working, whether it's on a firm strategy or on a potential merger, these are big, sometimes life-changing projects.
Yeah.
The mergers we work on are often once in a lifetime for the people who are leading them at the firms. We're talking about firms that have been around for dozens, if not 100 plus years, that are thinking about combining with each other. And so it's a very big deal and important to them, and they expect us to be there in person a lot of the time. And so we're happy to do that. So the travel is, you got to pace yourself and you got to condition yourself and be smart about it, but there's a lot of travel, and that's part of the gig.
So tell me, do you have tricks, because you've done it so much and you're a consultant per se? I'm assuming that you have perfected the art of flight and travel in transit. Would you have any tips or suggestions for those who may be stepping into more travel or who do it and could learn from you?
Yeah, it's a great question. A few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was feeling burned out on the travel. And remember thinking to myself, gosh, I love what I do, work with smart people every day on complex challenges, and opportunities, and fortunate to work with some of the best people running some of the best firms. So I'm grateful for what I get to do. But the travel's tough. So I was feeling a little burnt out about the travel. And I thought to myself that day, some days are better than others on the travel. I feel better about the travel some days than others. And I was trying to think about what made the better days better. And was there anything to learn from that? And I realized that the better days, the days that didn't feel so grueling, usually involved days when I was upgraded to first class on the flight, often involved taking a black car to the airport instead of a taxi or something else. And it often involved staying at a comfortable, good hotel. So I thought about that. And then I also thought about the fact that our clients are happy to reimburse us for travel. And we usually ask for reimbursement for coach level travel, coach level air and, the equivalent for hotel and ground transportation. And I was thinking about the delta in cost between coach and first class, whether it was for a flight or for hotel or for ground. And I realized I could just pay the difference and book in first class and always use a black car and always stay at a really, nice, comfortable hotel. And I kind of totaled up how much the delta would be for the year. And it really was not anything crazy. And so I just started after that, as a matter of course, to just book just about all my travel first class, always use a black car, always stay in a really comfortable hotel, and just pay the difference between what the clients pay for and what the cost is. And that has been one of the best decisions I've made to make travel manageable. And I kind of rationalize it because I feel like I'm not going to burn out on the travel as a result, and I could do this work that I love, for years longer. And so that's the way I handled it, and it's been great.
That's excellent. So your preferred airline is Delta, I assume?
I'm United, actually, because I'm Chicago. I live in Chicago. So most people here are United or American, and I am a United loyal passenger. But I think most people who travel a lot, especially if you're going to a lot of cities and have tight timelines, you sometimes mix up what airlines you take based on the schedules and the ones that get there to the places you're going nonstop the fastest. So I fly United most of the time, but when I need to for timing or routes, I'll fly, other airlines too.
Mm-hmm. Super helpful. It's fascinating just to be able to look at it from the Delta and how those changes just change your perspective and the way you travel and enjoy it.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more manageable if you're, for me anyway. Some people might not care as much, but for me, if I know I'm going to be flying first class and know I'm taking black cars, it makes it less grueling and a little more pleasant. And you could work more if you want to on the flights and in the car. And if you're not working, you could relax and watch. I've been going through, I was a latecomer to Homeland, the TV series. And so I've been kind of like jamming through the seasons of Homeland lately, and I'll save like a Friday flight on the way home and do an episode or two of Homeland. And it's really relaxing to sit there and do that. So little tricks like that make it a lot more manageable.
Excellent. Along the same line, so knowing you travel a lot, I also know that you're also very visible in the news and the media. So a couple different things I want to just talk to you about. First off, I want to get from you your advice on how attorneys or my audience, particularly the legal industry executives, being quoted in the press. What advice do you have for that?
I have found that it's been very helpful for my career to be visible in the media. I find that journalists often have a lot of pressure to create content. They're happy to have resources to help them think through what they want to write about and to get to people who could help in that effort and get to sources and explain some of the topics that they're covering. So for me, I've developed relationships with people who cover the business of law, and I've done that by being visible on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I find that reporters are power users often of Twitter. And so, I make sure to follow everybody who I could think of who covers the business of law to see what they're writing about and tweeting about. I find that when I am on Twitter and on LinkedIn, often it's not so much the content of what I'm saying or posting, but it's more just being visible and being on there. And I think that that's helpful to stay top of mind with reporters so that they think about you when they're writing a story that you might be able to help with. I find that being highly responsive to reporters when they calling them back right away, that helps a lot. They are often, in time-sensitive situations, need to find somebody quickly to help with a story, whether it's on the record or as a resource or to point them to other people to talk to. So I think calling them back, answering the phone as much as you can, and when you can't answer the phone, calling them back right away, that helps a lot. And then I think just being helpful to them, not always to get your name in the paper. Sometimes they want to interview you on the record, but other times it's more helpful to them if you could, give your take on something to explain and give context to a story they're working on, or to point them to people in firms or in other places that it would be good for them to talk to, given what they're writing about. So I think being a resource and helping them succeed in their roles, that helps a lot too. So those pretty straight, none of it's brain surgery, pretty straightforward. I've found having good relationships with reporters has been good for our business.
Thank you. That's excellent for sharing. Let's also jump into something very similar. So you've been on TV quite a bit, and would love to know how that happened for you and how you get pulled into live television or being on major news channels for legal industry expertise.
In my case, I had an interest in TV news as a kid and interned growing up at the local CBS affiliate in the town where I grew up in Connecticut. And then my first job out of college was producing TV news, and it was during the time of the O.J. Simpson trial. And so we had a half-hour daily live show at a local station in St. Louis where I went to college. And then I ended up going to law school and didn't go the TV news route, but I had always wanted to get back to it somehow. And a while back, a friend of my wife's who anchored the morning news on the NBC affiliate in Chicago, where we live now, said, you should come on sometime and talk about legal cases and celebrity legal cases, what she had in mind. And so I did that some on the NBC affiliate in Chicago. And I ended up getting a call from somebody at a network at Fox News, and they asked if I would come on. And then I got calls from HLN and from NBC News and others. And I never done it as a career, but I've done it because I think it's fun. And it brings me back to my days doing high school debate team, to be given a topic and to go head to head with somebody in front of a national audience. So I think it's a rush. It's probably not everybody's cup of tea. I think it's a rush and it's fun. I haven't done as much of it recently because I've just been working and traveling so much. I haven't had as much time to do it, but I think it's a lot of fun. And for some people, it's a great outlet and certainly helps with profile raising. And so most people who are listening have seen there's been a big proliferation of legal and political analysts on TV. Yep. And so it's, something that a lot of people have done what I've done with it. And I found it to be a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Jumping into another subject. So you and I had a conversation again 3 years ago, and we touched on a couple different points. And it's interesting. I want to just reflect on some of the topics we addressed. I'm going to mention a word or a phrase, and you give me a quick update.
Okay.
So first one, Brexit.
Well, definitely there have been developments since. I'll tell you that, a new prime minister was obviously elected this week in the UK, big Brexit supporter. Yep. I can tell you that I won't feel as apologetic about the state of affairs in the US politically when I go to the UK the next time, because they've got they've got their own situation. For legal, though, more to the point, I think that London is going to be an extremely important legal market for a long time. Certainly, it's the center of international arbitration, and I don't think that's going to change. And I also think it's going to be important for other industries, too. At the same time, many law firms are hedging their bets and investing on the continent in Paris and Frankfurt and some in other places. So we'll see how it plays out. But it's amazing how long it's taken for this to unfold. And even with that much time having passed, very unclear exactly what the exit's going to look like.
Yeah. Here's another one for you, and thank you for that. Election results.
Wow. What month did we talk in?
Yeah, so it was October 2016.
Yeah, wow. Well, we've had a surprise since then.
Yeah.
Heading towards another election, obviously. I think for legal, change in Washington is generally a good thing. And there hasn't been just normal change in Washington. There's been very extensive change in Washington since the current administration came into the White House. And so, you've seen whether it's antitrust investigations like the ones that were announced in the tech sector recently, or other regulatory enforcement actions, trade-related disputes. There's been a lot of action for law firms, and that spans many practices, many industry sectors, and the government affairs folks at many firms have never been busier. So I think we're headed towards another election, but change is generally good for law firms, and that's a good thing.
Here's another one. Again, these were all we talked about 3 years ago. So another one is current economy and law firm leadership outlook.
Well, that's a good one. My sense is that the outlook has dimmed a bit from last year. Last year, all of the data available suggested that it was the best year for legal in about 10 years, best year since the financial crisis. At the same time, the rate of growth on many key metrics was not close to what it was pre-2008 last year. And many firms last year, even though it was a great year for the industry overall, and even though we were 10 plus years into a strong economy, many firms did not have a great year last year. But my sense, based on the data and just anecdotally talking to chairs of firms, this year's not going as well for many firms as last year did, particularly for the larger firms. I'd say it's a mixed bag. While some are firing on all cylinders, many others are down materially on hours this year versus last year, as well as on other key metrics. Deal flow has decreased, especially large deals. And at the same time, some firms outside the AmLaw 50 and some even outside the AmLaw 200 are reporting very good years, which is consistent with prior periods of time when the economy was starting to soften. Sometimes there's a flight to lower rate options. And also when the flow of large deals slows down, often that hits firms that do those deals hard. So I think the outlook is so-so. The one last thing I'd say on this topic is that there was a McKinsey piece that I read recently that talked about how hard it is, obviously, to predict when a downturn is going to happen. Impossible to do. But then it looked at a group of companies that had weathered prior economic downturns well over time. And they called those companies that had weathered the downturns, they called them the resilience. And one thing that the resilience had in common, according to this McKinsey article, was that they acted sooner and with more alacrity in advance of downturns to strengthen themselves and get lean, so that they went into downturns stronger and came out the other side stronger. And so I think that's relevant and should inform law firms. So, getting strong, addressing overcapacity and other things that weigh down the performance, and doing that in advance of the downturn is going to be helpful for many firms, and some are more on top of those than others.
We also talked about Dentons and the race to 10,000 lawyers. What's your take on that now?
Well, they made it. There are over 10,000 lawyers.
Yep.
And, I personally think what Dentons is doing is unbelievably impressive, is my own take. It's not the same strategy. It's different than the strategy of many other firms. But I think I think it's hard to dispute that what they've accomplished in a relatively short period of time is extremely impressive. I think if you look at the top 100 brands in the world, starting with Disney and Apple and the rest that are at the top of that list, you'll see that there are not any law firms on that top 100 brands list. But you'll also see that the big four are all on that list. And I would predict that Dentons may well become the first law firm to make that top 100 brands in the world list. They are building market share and scale. Their profile is growing too. And this is to take nothing away from the other global firms that have their own strategies and are executing on them very impressively. DLA would be an example, unbelievably impressive firm and executing on its strategy. Baker McKenzie, the same thing. Hogan Lovells. But I view Dentons as having a different strategy from those firms and executing on it. And I think what they're doing is very impressive.
I had also asked you, and I was curious if it's changed at all, or I don't know if you remember what I had asked, but the single most important characteristic a future managing partner or chairman should learn or have. Yeah, just want to ask again, what is your take on that with what you know now?
I think to be an effective chair or managing partner in a law firm, you've got to check a number of boxes. One thing is you need to have credibility with your partners, particularly to make hard decisions that are going to benefit the firm. And so I think to have credibility with your partners in a law firm, in most law firms, that means you need to be perceived as an excellent lawyer on the substance, and you also need to be perceived as highly effective and productive at generating business for the firm. And so, right or wrong, I think you need to have credibility with your partners, and in most firms, that means you need to be perceived as high quality, both in doing and bringing the work in. So I think those attributes are must-haves in most firms. Then beyond that, I think it's important to have the ability to create a vision for the future so that you could create a followership and lead your partners towards the achievement of the vision. In other words, develop a mandate that, even in a flat organization, allows successful chairs to lead their partners to achieve their aspirations for the future. I think it's important to have strong EQ and be able to be a good listener, also be able to have difficult conversations and make choices that are in the best long-term interests of the firm, but that may be culturally very difficult to make, like asking chronically underperforming people in practices and offices to leave the firm where that's necessary to allow the firm to get to where it wants to go long-term would be an example of something really hard to do. But I find that the people that are the most effective chairs, as hard as that is and as gut-wrenching as it is, they're able to have those conversations effectively.
Yeah, thank you. And kind of pivoting to more personal topics, Kent, what does vacation look like for you if you were to take it? And you had shared something with me. I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit.
I think vacation's really important for me and for a lot of people. It helps me be able to, keep up an intense pace by taking a break here and there. So we've got little kids, and my wife and I and our kids just got back from 2 weeks off, which was the longest break we had ever taken. But it was great. And we rented a house on the shore in Connecticut where I grew up and saw my folks who still live there. And it was good. I call it a family summer vacation. And my wife Grace always steps in and corrects me and says, no, it's really a family trip because we're going to see my family, not as much a vacation for her. But she jokes, and we had a great time. And so that kind of vacation was great. We were married a little more than 11 years ago in Hawaii, and we love going to Hawaii. And so that's another favorite spot for us, and we try to get there as much as we can. So I find when I'm, probably like a lot of your listeners, hard to completely shut it off. I, often still will have to do some phone calls and things for projects that are, at an intense stage and no time to pause kind of thing, but try as much as possible to recharge when we take vacation.
Yeah. Kent, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you have questions or would like to recommend someone to be on the podcast, please email them to podcast@findthelions.com. If you like this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. Also, share our podcast via email or social media. To share our podcast, listen to more shows, or to read the transcription of this audio, go to liongroup.recruiting.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.